The rise and fall of an empire. Britain's unwanted digital IDs. If you live in the UK, like it or not, you are getting a digital ID. But what does that really mean for the average British person? Try and imagine yourself living in a world where every door you touch decides whether you are worthy of crossing its threshold. You walk to the supermarket, but the gate does not open because your weekly food quota has already been exceeded. You move on to the train station, but your ticket is rejected before it exists, the system silently blocking your journey because your attendance at a recent protest has marked you as a risk. Later, you try to meet a friend for coffee, but the cafe scanner glows red and denies entry, branding you non-compliant. No one argues with you, no officer confronts you, no trial is held. You are not formally punished, yet you cannot participate. Every purchase, every journey, every social interaction is weighed, monitored, and scored. One by one, the parts of your daily life are switched off until you exist only as an exile in your own city. I don't mean to scare you, but this is unfortunately not science fiction. Not if you live in the United Kingdom. These scenarios are almost a logical conclusion of a future built on digital identification systems, constant tracking of your everyday behavior and movements, complete control over your entire existence. They will scan biometrics, scan social media posts, dietary habits such as shopping, any spending or savings, criminal records, social activities, jobs, associations, interests, and so on. Then they can decide in silence who belongs and who does not. With the flick of a switch, you can be shut off, cancelled from everything in life: food, travel, social media. Most things you can think of can be digitally shut down with ease. Digital identification is one of the most dystopian technological shifts of the modern era in Britain. Unlike a passport or a driving license, which are static records of who you are at a certain point in time, a digital ID forms part of a living database. It is not just proof of your existence or eligibility to travel or drive. It can track your behavior and your movements wherever you go. It can include biometric data such as your face, fingerprints, or iris scan, alongside personal records, financial habits, medical history, and even your location. This makes it fundamentally different from traditional forms of identification that were separate, limited in scope, and only demanded on specific occasions. A passport tells border control where you were born and what nationality you hold. A driving license says you passed a test and are legally allowed to operate a car. A digital ID, however, is a key that does not simply open doors. It records how you enter, when you enter, how often you enter, and whether you should one day be refused. The appeal is obvious. Governments and corporations promote digital ID systems as convenient and secure. With a few taps on a phone, citizens can verify themselves to access healthcare, government benefits, workplaces, or transport. The promise is efficiency and modernization in a world that increasingly lives online, yet behind this promise lies a darker truth. What makes digital ID powerful is not only its ability to confirm identity, it is its ability to connect individuals to vast pools of data, constantly updated and cross-referenced. A digital ID is not a snapshot frozen in time, but a surveillance mechanism that watches and remembers. This difference matters because the move from paper-based identification to a permanent system of digital recognition transforms the relationship between citizen and state. Identity stops being something you present at intervals. It becomes something that follows you. It is alive and dynamic, embedded in financial transactions, health systems, workplace logins, and border checkpoints. This continuous nature is what makes digital ID such a formidable instrument. It expands identification into monitoring. Consider the case of China. In June 2022, thousands of citizens opened the Health Code app on their phones in Henan province. This app had been created to show whether someone was at risk of carrying COVID and was supposedly judged only on medical grounds. To the shock of those affected, many found their status suddenly turned red, which in that system meant they were forbidden from traveling. Yet these were not ill people. Many were bank customers who had tried to withdraw their life savings from 4 rural banks that had collapsed amid fraud investigations. As protests grew, local authorities used the health code to force silence. Digital ID had been bent to political will. People who wanted to demonstrate peacefully were restrained, not with police batons but with an algorithm that locked them in place. This was a fundamental abuse of a system that claimed to exist for public health. It stripped away the rights of ordinary individuals in an instant, showing just how easily a digital ID can be turned from medical tool to weapon of control. This case exemplifies the core danger. Digital ID is programmable. It can expand beyond its original justification. A passport cannot suddenly change to revoke your right to protest. A driving license cannot update overnight to ban you from boarding a train because your political opinions have been flagged. But a digital ID linked into databases and systems across society can alter its parameters silently. Without oversight, without warning, rights we take for granted can vanish the moment they inconvenience those in power. Europe offers its own lessons. The Netherlands endured a scandal now known simply as the childcare benefits affair. It began with a government system meant to detect fraud in childcare benefit claims. Algorithms using digital records labelled over 20,000 families as fraudulent when in reality many were innocent. Families were devastated. Parents were forced to repay enormous sums they did not owe. Jobs were lost. Homes were lost. Marriages collapsed. Children were taken into state care. In some cases, lives ended in despair. What made this scandal possible was the blind faith in digital profiling and categorization. Once the system flagged a person, the bureaucracy treated the decision as undeniable truth. Human judgment disappeared and the digital record became destiny. Here, we see another face of digital ID. Not only can it act as a tracking tool, but its data can also define a person's life chances. Wrongfully categorized by a system, a person can fall into ruin almost overnight. Contrast that with old-fashioned passports or licenses. If a mistake was made, it was visible and could be contested. A passport wrongfully stamped could be challenged directly with border officials. A driving license flagged as suspended could be appealed. In these traditional systems, humans weighed claims and evidence within clear boundaries. By contrast, digital ID shifts the burden to algorithms, often opaque and inaccessible. When the system labels you, that label spreads silently across platforms. Your bank may treat you differently. Your employer may hesitate to hire you. Your government may refuse a benefit. The interconnectedness makes errors catastrophic and harder to undo. Kenya offers another instructive story. In 2019, the government launched a massive digital identification system called Huduma Number, a project that aimed to give every citizen a unique digital number linked to fingerprints, facial data, and personal records. Authorities claimed it would modernize governance, but advocates and human rights groups soon raised concerns. Millions of people from marginalized communities found themselves at risk of exclusion because they lacked prior documentation needed to enroll. Refugees, nomadic groups, and ethnic minorities were suddenly facing the possibility of being legally invisible. For them, digital ID was not empowerment but erasure. Without entry into the system, they could not access education, healthcare, or voting rights. What was meant to unify a nation became a border inside society, dividing those who could prove identity through paperwork and biometrics from those who could not. Digital exclusion on this scale is a new form of inequality created by technology itself. If we study these cases together, a picture emerges. Digital ID is fundamentally different because of 3 traits. It is persistent, it is programmable, and it is pervasive. Persistence means it records and follows you constantly, unlike a passport that rests in a drawer until you travel. Programmable means its conditions can be altered at will, for example, barring you from travel or benefits. Pervasive means it crosses barriers between health, finance, education, and politics to form an all-encompassing profile. These traits make digital ID immensely powerful and dangerously subject to abuse. Supporters of digital identification often insist that the answer lies in regulation. They argue for safeguards, legal oversight, and transparency. But here the risk lies in the speed of adoption. Once such systems are deeply embedded across society, extracting them is almost impossible. Citizens may discover too late that their every action is recorded, scored, and occasionally penalized. What begins as convenience ends as confinement. A chilling aspect of digital ID is that it transforms identity from something you hold into something owned by others. A passport is in your pocket. A license sits in your wallet. A digital ID is stored on servers operated by governments or private companies. It is subject to hacking, surveillance, and misuse. Control over your very self becomes externalized into distant networks. This creates a shift in power. Instead of the individual presenting identity on their own terms, the system presents the individual. That inversion changes what it means to be free. To understand how serious this is, we must remember history. Societies have collapsed into repression, not always through grand events, but through gradual erosion of liberties. Surveillance states rarely announce themselves at the start. They emerge through a series of small steps where new tools are justified as safety measures or improvements. Digital ID fits that pattern perfectly. It does not feel threatening when it allows you to board a plane more quickly or claim a benefit through an app. Yet, accumulated over years, it normalizes the idea that your movements are forever logged, your financial behavior scrutinized, and your political loyalty noted. The tools of convenience today are the chains of tomorrow. We are entering an uncertain future. Digital identification systems are spreading across continents. The European Union is moving toward a digital wallet initiative. African, Asian, and Latin American nations are rolling out biometric enrollments to millions. The justification is the same everywhere: greater efficiency, easier access to services, stronger security. But efficiency for whom and security against what? The stories of Henan, the Netherlands, and Kenya remind us that efficiency can mean silencing dissent, destroying families, and excluding minorities. Security can be a word that hides control. The fundamental lesson is simple. Digital ID is not merely identification. It is a tool of governance, surveillance, and categorization. Unlike traditional documents, it never rests, it never forgets, and it can change its function overnight. To embrace it blindly is to hand over something precious: the right to move and live untracked, the right to be treated as an individual and not a data profile. Once traded away, these rights are difficult to reclaim. Citizens around the world must therefore consider whether the promised convenience is worth the potential cost. Are faster queues at airports worth the ability of a government or corporation to map your life? Is easier access to benefits worth the risk of digital exclusion or mislabeled fraud? The past shows the dangers, and the future will magnify them if vigilance is not maintained. Digital ID may well define the next chapter of human freedom. The question is whether it will be a chapter of liberation or of control. Passports and licenses once served their purpose well. They were proofs of identity, bounded and manageable. Digital ID by its very nature is different. It is not proof, it is presence. It is surveillance with the mask of efficiency. The choice before us now is whether we accept this new reality or resist it before it becomes irreversible.